And 3, 2, 1, and we're in. Yes, they don't ticket in West Hollywood.
Let's hope not.
Adam, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. Thanks for being my guest.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And we're kind of coming out of the doldrums of summer finally. It's been a slow August. September's kind of picking up.
Yeah.
I hope things are picking up for you as well.
I've been lucky enough to have been working since June, early July. So I've been pretty busy this summer, which has been really nice. Writing on a new cartoon that'll be out in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
Sony's doing it. It's going to be a lot of fun. I wish I could talk about it more, but it's all early stages. But we're cranking away on it and having a good time.
That's great. I mean, I guess this summer's been better than last summer when there was a writer's strike and an actor's strike and all the chaos, right?
Yeah, well, between the pandemic and the strike and changes in the industry and people trying to figure out streaming and what goes where and how long shows should be and how many of them there should be, it's a tricky time for writers. And a lot of people I know are having trouble finding work just because coming out of the strike, studios are being really cautious with their money, what they're buying and what they're going to make. And I think there's still some of that's happening. So there's a lot of really good writing talent out there that's just looking to help shows. So hopefully they all find a place.
Hopefully, yeah. It's crazy when you read the news. Like Paramount just got sold to Skydance, and Warner Brothers is having all kinds of difficulties, and Sony's complaining, and Netflix is flying, and no one can figure out streaming other than Netflix, and Amazon just spends money because they're rich and it doesn't. They never tell you like if they're making any money on Prime or not. Like,
right. And there's so much turnover at each of these studios that it's really hard to get a grip on what any one place is looking for at a given time. So that complicates matters even further. It's just a bit of an unstable time in the industry in general.
It has, I make TV shows, but I just make them for myself. Like I only make the TV shows that I'm in. And that's such a foreign concept in LA, in Beverly Hills, and dealing with people here. Because like I'll go into these pitch meetings at a streaming partner, for example, and I'll be like, okay, so I'm an adventure guy. I make these shows all around the world. If you want to travel, like it's a little bit like Anthony Bourdain, but a little bit more adventure-y, less about food, more about hiking, climbing, but learning about the people, learning about the culture, breaking bread with guides and locals and everything like that.
Yeah. And
then they're like, we really need a fashion show. Can your company do a fashion show, like a fashion series? And I'm like, that's not my thing.
Well, that's the beauty of being your own boss. You can say no to stuff like that and continue to make the content that you want. And now we have outlets for that and certainly the equipment for that. So everybody can make their own stuff if they want to. If you're able to make a living at it, so much the better.
Yeah. Tubi's very interesting. Tubi's one of these new streaming platforms that have come around. It's free, but you got to watch the ads that are embedded. But it's free, right? At least now Amazon's charging you a bunch and making you watch ads. I feel like the whole point of streaming originally was to get rid of the ads, right?
Yeah. Well, then they found out they couldn't really make a whole lot of money. And so advertising was a way to go. And now you can pay to upgrade your service to get content without the ads, and you're paying another X dollars. And a lot of people are going back to basic cable. I think a lot of people are moving away now from the streaming world and reattaching the cord, I guess.
It's strange, isn't it?
It's
How
strange.
We've come. I remember being in China. I remember living in China, and I had a Netflix account, and I couldn't watch it in China because they're not allowed in China. So I had like a VPN, which allowed me to fake that I was in the U.S. just so I could watch House of Cards.
You got to go where you can see your shows, man.
Oh, that was a game-changing series.
Or as they would say in the previous generation, your programs. You got to see your stories.
So look, you've had an incredible career. You're still having an incredible career. You have an incredible career ahead of you. But where are you from originally? Let's get into it.
Sure. Well, I was born in Chicago.
Okay.
During a flu epidemic.
Okay.
Probably has hung over my life the entire time.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Phoenix. So we moved to Arizona when I was pretty little, and I was there through high school, and developed a real fondness for super hot summers. Boy, I tell you, they're just the best thing in the world, and I'm being very sarcastic.
Facetious.
Yeah, right? I went back to Chicago for college, studied journalism, and then graduated, moved back to Phoenix, sort of worked in journalism for a couple of years. It wasn't for me. Decided if I was going to try and tell stories the way I wanted to tell stories, that I should get out quick and go back to school, get a degree in film. So I did. I moved to Texas, and I was there for 3 years going to film school, and then I moved out here in 95.
Wow, 95.
Yeah.
So you wanted to be a storyteller, you wanted to be a writer, you tried journalism and the hat didn't fit. What was it about journalism that didn't work? Because I spent years in that world.
Yeah. It was never, there wasn't ink in my blood. There wasn't printer's ink in my blood, I think. I think that when I was in college, I didn't know how one got to tell entertaining stories and make a living at it. I didn't know how people got to write for television shows, how they got to write for comic books or anything like that. It seemed very distant and very far away from me. And I'm a guy who likes something stable, something predictable, something that I know is going to, keep me in macaroni and cheese for the rest of my life. And so I figured journalism was a good, stable profession. And so I actually wound up working for a hospital in their community relations department, writing magazines, newsletters, press releases, things like that. And it just wasn't for me. The stuff I was having the most fun doing was drawing cartoons for people's newsletters and just for my own fun. And I was doing improv comedy and I was enjoying that. And I wasn't enjoying my job. And I thought, if I'm going to try and find a way to make a living doing something I am going to enjoy, I probably should do it earlier rather than later, before I got too settled in at the hospital. So I applied to film schools.
So you can get the 2 boxes of macaroni and cheese instead of
extra cheese.
I love those old blue Kraft macaroni and cheese. Those are the best.
I still eat them.
So 95, you come out here. Did you know anyone? Was there any kind of nepotism? Did you have family in the business? Or did you just come out here and be like, I've arrived?
Well, I'm so anxious a person that for a year before I moved out here, I was on postgraduate fellowship with the James Michener Center for Writers, Texas Center for Writers. So I was in a really fortunate place. I didn't have to work. I didn't have to turn anything in. I just had a year to write and get ready to move out to.
So that sounds like a great deal. How do you get that deal?
Had to apply, had to interview, and I had to write a lot. And so I knew I was coming to LA after school, so I knew I had to have writing samples, but I also knew I needed to hit the ground running as much as possible. So I spent a lot of sleepless nights making lists of everybody I knew in California, everybody I knew who knew somebody, everybody I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. And I was armed with that. And then while I was in Austin, the Austin Film Festival started, which was initially just a screenwriting festival.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I went down there and I volunteered for that. And I got in early, and a friend of mine and I were among the people that started planning the festival. We put together panels and invited guests and moderated panels and met everybody who came in for it. And there were plenty of real screenwriters who came in for it, film and television. So I knew some people that way as well that I could ring up when I got here. And I had made a connection through a high school pal, a guy who was out here working for Spelling, Aaron Spelling's company. And he was looking for somebody to be a script reader, which is now almost an obsolete profession here in LA. You would get paid to read scripts and then write what you thought of them, essentially book reports. And I did that for about 7 years while I was doing other things.
Yeah. For Aaron Spelling?
Not for Aaron Spelling, but for one of his executives. And I read books, I read screenplays, I read teleplays, and it was a great education in addition to being a way to make something of a living. Not quite as much macaroni and cheese. But it was something that I could count on, and I gained other clients by doing that. And so I had a pretty good amount of reading to do every week, which was good and paid me decently. So I could afford to stay out here while I was working on samples.
How important is it to read other scripts and then know what's good and what's not before you start putting your own pen to paper?
It was helpful for me because I was trying to break into television, particularly 1-hour drama. And so I wanted to read as many produced scripts as I could, and I did, to see what kinds of scripts were getting made and get a sense of how somebody would make them, what's producible, what's not producible. And you get to be pretty capable early on at spotting what doesn't work. And so I was reading a lot of these scripts for Spelling, and 90% of them didn't make the grade for one reason or another. And when you're a reader for a big production company, or when you were a reader for a big production company, they don't want to see 100 scripts come their way. They want the best of the best of the best, things that are going to meet what their needs are, what they're wanting to do.
You're the filter.
I was the first line of defense, and that's terrifying because I'm just off the bus from Texas. What do I know, right? And that was a lot of people's first jobs when they got to LA. And it's a great way to start out.
So what, I mean, like what are some red flags when you would read a script that you'd be like, this isn't going to fly?
Spiral notebook paper. So definitely not something I would recommend. Crayon. It's not good. It's really true. It's sort of a truism that you get hooked in the first 10 pages of a script. You can tell right away if something's going to be good, if something's going to hold your attention. So you need something big to happen in those first 10 pages. And if it's all just set up and set up and set up, chances are it's not going to be the kind of script somebody's looking for. This is also just sort of a basic rule of thumb, but you don't want lines and lines and lines of description on your first page, because a reader opens that first page and sees just big blocks of gray. They go, oh my God. And you're starting out with the strike against you. It's just the way that works.
Unless you can get Morgan Freeman to read the dialogue and be the narrator, and then you've got an Oscar.
Well, there you go. That's all you need, right?
Or an Emmy, yeah.
And the other thing readers do first thing is they open to the last page to see how many pages they're going to have to read.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because it's about volume when you're a script reader, right? You got to read as many scripts as you can, get paid by the script. So the more scripts you can read, the more money you make. And a 200-page script is daunting. It's really daunting.
I bet, yeah.
So you try to keep it within the ranges of what networks and studios show. So around 2 hours, hour and a half, somewhere in there if it's a feature. A lot of them run longer than that now. Mm-hmm. But it's you gotta. I would recommend strongly that new writers read as much as they can of other writers' work, specifically the good writers, the ones who get a lot of stuff produced and ones whose work has done really well. They know.
The crayon comment kind of hit me earlier because, if you're on a bender at the Chateau Marmont at 4 a.m., they only have crayons available.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
And that's when inspiration really...
Yeah. See, I haven't been there since the days when they had quills. So, I'm totally out of the loop on what's the latest at Chateau.
It's that's pretty funny. Okay, so you come in from Texas, you become a script reader for a few years to get your sense of what's going on. I mean, and then were you also writing at that time for yourself and trying to figure out like how you can get someone to read your script?
Sure.
Yeah.
I was pretty lucky. I had an agent before I moved out here.
Oh, really? How'd that work out?
In those days, the Writers Guild, and they may still do this, they had a list of writers or agents who accept unsolicited submissions. Most agencies don't do that. But there are a couple of agencies, or there were, that would, if you sent them a blind script, they would consider reading it. So I wrote to all of those, when I was still in school, I wrote to all of those agents and said, here's what I've got. Would you like to read any of my samples? And I got 2 letters back. One that said no, and just no. And one from a great lady in upstate New York who said, yeah, sure, send it to me. Mm-hmm. So I sent her my samples, and she read them, and she liked them, and she signed me. And so I had an agent. The downside of that particular situation was that she had never been to L.A. She didn't know anybody in the entertainment industry, but she was a bulldog, and she got me a lot of meetings, primarily with animation studios, because they're a lot more willing, or they were a lot more willing, to meet with new writers than, say, CBS. Mm-hmm. So I had some meetings when I first got out here, which was cool. And through my alumni network at Texas, I had met a couple of producers, very, very highly thought of producers here in television in LA, who were working on an Aaron Spelling show, as it turned out.
Oh. And he really ran this town for a good couple decades, didn't he? Oh, does he? No. I watched 90210.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You got one great viewer. There you go. No, I did too. So I met with these producers, and we had a great conversation, and it turned out they were looking for a writer's assistant for their show. And so, or not a writer's assistant, they were looking for a script coordinator for their show. And they asked me if I wanted to come in and trail the script coordinator around for a couple of days, get a sense of whether or not I could do it, and then take over. They were in the middle of their season. So I went in, and I followed around the script coordinator, and got a sense of what he did. And then after the couple of days were over, I went into the writer's room, and I said, I can't do this.
What does a script coordinator do?
So it broke the big rule. When you just come out here, you're supposed to say yes to everything. I said, hell no, can't do it. The script coordinator formats the scripts, distributes the scripts, makes changes to the scripts, sits in on the writers' meetings and takes notes, all that stuff. Or the writer's assistant is in the room taking notes, but one or the other.
That's right, because all the actors and directors and everyone working has to have the same script and they have to have the same changes. And I guess you guys are constantly making changes on the fly.
Yeah. And this was, late 90s, and the script writing software hadn't really been standardized. So there were a lot of different programs that were out there. I did not know this program at all. And it was very high pressure, and I'm not very good with high pressure, at least I wasn't then. And I thought, if I come in and I try to take this job in the middle of the season, when a lot relies on this position, I don't want to let these people down. So I said, I appreciate it, but I can't. And they said, what? I said, I don't want to fail in front of you. And they said, well, okay. And then they had a writer's assistant position come up like right after that. And they called me back and they said, do you want to be a writer's assistant and sort of learn everything about how the office works? And I said, sure, that'd be great. So I was a writer's assistant on that show. It was called Savannah. And it was on for a season and a half on the WB. No, the CW? The WB.
I think it's the CW.
CW.
Right?
It was the CW. Yeah. And I was the writer's assistant on that show for about, 6-7 months. And then the producers who had initially hired me left to create another show. And the producers who were running the show were kind enough to ask me, they had read my stuff, if I wanted to come in as a staff writer. Mm. So I was a staff writer for a very short period of time because the show was immediately canceled. And I was back out on the street. I had this agent in upstate New York who didn't really know the business. When I had gotten my job on Savannah, I was lucky enough to be able to find a new agent who was out here better connected.
That's important, isn't it? Like you need to have an agent who's in the town that you're in because each town works differently. Meetings work differently. Yeah. The way projects get put together differently. Like you really need, if you're in LA, you need someone who's in LA. If you're in London, you need someone who's in London. Like,
I think if you're in upstate New York and you're trying to get, a client's hired in LA, that's really hard. And this is where my agent was. So, you need to know the industry. You need to know the players. You need to be able to meet with the players. And as somebody who's trying to break into the writing field, you need as many people on your side, as many advocates as you can get. So I needed somebody who was out here who knew the terrain. So I had a new agent by then, but I didn't have any credits. I was a staff writer on the show. I never got to write a script. So nobody knew me from anybody else. So I was getting ready to move back to Texas.
Oh, wow.
Back and work on the film festival, hopefully. And just, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed meeting the people and working with those people. And I was about ready to do that when I got a call from my old agent up in New York. And she said, can you picture a situation where we could work together again? I said, what are you talking about? What you're talking? And she said, well, one of the animation studios that you met with a year and a half ago, they came across one of your scripts. They want you to write a script for one of their new shows. And I said, yeah, you have to talk to my new agent. If you guys can work it out, that would be great. I would love to do it. And they did. And I wound up writing an episode of a new cartoon for an animation studio called Klasky Chupo Animation. And the show was The Wild Thornberrys.
Oh.
And so that was my first produced credit. And that went pretty well. And they put me on staff. And I wrote another bunch of episodes. And then they moved me on to another Klasky show called Rocket Power. And everything has just sort of fanned out from there.
It's funny, like people listening, like, don't know how the industry works. Most of you, I guess, and I don't, like, especially on the writing side. But, like, it's funny, like, you get that first break as a writer's assistant, and then you get, pumped up to being a writer.
Yeah.
And then a couple of weeks later, the show gets canceled and you're unemployed again. Like, there's no security in this town.
Right. And I mentioned earlier, I thrive on that. I thrive on security. So it was not my natural habitat. And it took a lot of getting used to because it would happen more than once. But that first gig in animation paved the way for just about everything else that I've done since.
It's amazing, though. Like, once you get your foot in the door and prove that you can do one thing well, people will come back to you and rely on you to do that one thing.
Yes, but there's a lot that goes into doing that one thing well. And it's not just writing. It's how you interact with people. It's how you work with your bosses. It's whether or not you can be on time. It's whether or not you can spell. You'd be surprised how many scripts have really gross spelling errors and get thrown out because of it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Doesn't everyone have spell check everywhere?
This was late 90s. And if you don't use spell check now, you darn well should. Yeah. But I'll tell you a story. One of my samples when I moved out here was a script for Frasier.
Oh, yeah. Old Frasier.
And it was a pretty good spec. And my agent, who was up in New York, God bless her, I sent it to her, and she didn't really watch a lot of television. And so she changed the spelling of Frasier on the title page to Frasier with a Z and sent it out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I got a meeting through my alumni network, again, with a television producer who was working on a show. And he said, and he pointed to this. He said, if it was anybody else, I would have thrown this in the trash immediately, but I'm cutting you a break. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, I got to be double sure, even when I send stuff out, to tell the people I'm sending it to, it's okay as it is. You don't need to change any letters. You got to control as much as you can control when you're trying to break in. And what you can control is whether or not you're there. You can control whether or not your writing is any good, and you can control the quality of the formatting.
Yeah.
So,
and then not get someone who's down the line to start to mess with that. Yeah.
It's tough.
So what made you, where did you go in Texas to school, and what made you go there instead of like an NYU or a USC or something like that have like more well-known film programs? What was it about Texas?
It was the football. I was recruited to play defensive tackle. And, no, I went to the University of Texas at Austin.
Okay.
And I went there because I wasn't accepted anywhere else. I applied to USC, I applied to UCLA, NYU, and Texas, and I was accepted at Texas.
And University of Texas Austin has like a screenwriting like film program?
They do. They have a very good one. In those days, it was a lot smaller as now. My screenwriting class was 4 people.
4 people.
That was it. And of those 4, I think I'm the only one who came out here. So the good news was I got a lot of attention from the instructors, and I got close with my classmates, and we were all very good sounding boards for each other. The bad news was I was the only one who came out here, so we couldn't really bounce off each other and help each other with different opportunities and stuff. It worked out. But, there's something to be said for going to school with a lot of other people who are trying to do what you do so you can have that alumni network in place. Yeah. That said, Austin was a lot smaller in those days. There was a really thriving independent film scene there. Richard Linklater was doing stuff. Robert Rodriguez was doing stuff. So a lot was happening. And this film festival was starting up. So there was a lot of Hollywood attention on Austin. And so it was a good time to be there.
Before Joe Rogan turned it into a massive city, right?
Yeah, he is solely responsible.
I still want to go to his comedy mothership, his comedy club that he built out there. I think that's magical that he's like completely gravitated the center of stand-up comedy from LA to Austin, or at least kind of made some competitor to it.
Well, he's got a lot of gravity himself. And I think that's created a lot of that. So there's still a pretty thriving stand-up scene here in New York. So it's nice that there are places all over the country that you can go to try and get ahead in that world. When I was there, that was just starting to happen.
Yeah.
It was still the live music capital of the world, and that's what it was.
Really? Austin?
Oh, yeah. That's how they build themselves.
I thought it was like Nashville or, was it New Orleans or something like that?
Those are great scenes as well.
Yeah.
But Austin had a really thriving, Austin City Limits, the television show, attracts a lot of talent there, and a lot of musicians were too. So there was a lot going on, but it wasn't particularly well known for film until Rodriguez and Linklater came along, and that was just a couple of years before I got there. So I was the beneficiary of a lot of people coming to town and being able to meet and talk to people one-on-one, which was great.
Could you imagine a life where you were a screenwriter, writing for television or writing for animated films, and you weren't in LA making the rounds?
Yeah, I get asked about that a lot by new writers. Do I have to be in LA? Do I have to come out there?
No.
And the answer now is no, because you've got the technology to do your work from wherever you want to do your work. But I will say this, it sure helps to be here, because this is where the business is. This is where the offices are. This is where the people are. And there's no substitute for meeting somebody face to face and having a conversation with them when you're looking somebody in the eye. And that's harder to do remotely and get a sense of who people are and how they communicate.
And thanks for coming in today, by the way, face to face. We're not doing this on Zoom.
No, well, I am. No. So yeah, I tell people that if they'll increase their chances if they wind up in a city where there's a lot of production going, whether that's LA, whether that's New York, London, whatever, Atlanta. You want to be where the people who do the hiring are.
Well, like, so when I started off as a photographer back in the day, I was living in Shanghai, China, and I was in China for 18 years. And I had to make a pilgrimage to New York, like at least once a year for a week, to meet all the magazines, all the newspapers. I freelanced for the New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Forbes, Fortune, all of them before the financial crisis, because that really wiped out print publishing. But I was doing that, and I had I had the photography book and everything, and I would actually go and meet people face to face. Because if I was just gonna stay in China and send emails, it just wasn't gonna work. So it was I got one break from a writer, Howard French at the New York Times. He really vouched for me, and that kind of got the ball rolling. And then after that, in order to get all the other magazines, I had to go and meet everyone face to face. So this idea that you can just live in Colorado because you like rock climbing and then write scripts and be a Hollywood scriptwriter is kind of bullshit. Like, I think you really need to be in the writer room. You need to be in the trenches. You need to be fighting in LA.
Certainly, if you get hired on a staff of a show and there's a writer's room, you got to be here.
Yeah.
But you can do it. You can do it from anywhere you want to do it. But you got to meet the people, and you got to be willing to come to LA to meet the people. I think at least at first, they got to know who they're dealing with, what kind of person you are, what you'd be like to work with, what you'd be like in a room. And you just can't get that same kind of sense from being on video.
Not at all, especially if it's a pivotal position and they're going to count on you to get stuff done on a deadline.
When you're breaking in, and I tell this to new writers, you want to give the people who do the hiring as few reasons to say no to you as possible. And one of the reasons they can say no is that you're not willing to move out to where the show is. And
don't talk about politics
or Fight Club. So you don't want to give them that reason. You don't want to misspell Frasier, and give them a reason to say no, because people look for any reason to say no.
It's funny, isn't that? Like, if you have one chink in your armor, someone will tune in on it. It doesn't matter how good your writing is. They'll be like, "Yep, you're gone."
Well, listen, in this town, for somebody to stick their neck out for you and risk something for you, that's a big deal. And if they take a risk and it doesn't work out, then they're looking at them as the ones who messed it up. So you got to give those people every reason to say, yes, I'm worth that risk, and then pay it off for them.
It's interesting, because I live in a very isolated world. Like, I have my own podcast. I make my own TV shows. I produce, direct, and host them myself. And I don't deal with broadcasters directly. I have an agent. So what I do is I kind of raise money independently, make my shows, give it to the agent, and then the agent sells them to Amazon and BBC and Discovery, all that kind of stuff, which is great. But it means I'm totally kind of out of the loop in a lot of ways because it's because I struggle maybe working with people, but also but also just taking notes and dealing with too much inputs, like, because it really wears me down. So it's kind of nice when people maybe give you less money than they would give someone else, but then they give you a lot of space,
more control.
Yeah.
If you're going to be working in film and television out here, unless you're raising the money, starring in the film, directing the film, writing the film, whatever, you're going to be dealing with other people. And it's just the way it works. So you have to develop those skills too. And it takes a while.
I mean, how hard was it for you to get comfortable in a room of other writers? Like, I mean, how many, so your agent calls you and says, okay, there's a new show, it's coming on Netflix. They want you to be a staff writer. There's 8 other writers, why don't you go meet them? Like, what is that like, being part of a writer's room of 8 or 10 people who are now responsible for putting together an entire television show?
Dude, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really great because you're all there for the same reason. You all want to make the best show possible. Everybody's contributing ideas. You're bouncing off each other. And it's just, that kind of collaboration is a joy. It's a lot more fun than being alone in your bunker, writing your script and sending it out and not knowing who's looking at it really, and then getting notes back from some sort of unseen face. And that's not the kind of collaboration that you get in a writer's room. And I loved it. I really loved it. We were talking earlier, I wrote an episode of the rebooted version of MacGyver a couple of years ago. And I got to go into the writer's room for that for 3 days with the writers. It's just the best time. It was so much fun working with those guys. And, we were all just trying to make the best MacGyver we could. And I really enjoyed that.
And I mean, like, obviously we know, like, I guess television, for example, there's a lot of producers, and they're kind of end up being the showrunners. How involved are they in the writer's room as well? Or do they really give you guys space? Or I guess it'd be different on every series, right?
I imagine.
Yeah.
They're usually pretty involved. They've got a lot of other stuff they've got to do. So they have people working with them who, you'll handle the writer's room this day. I'll be in on Tuesday. You guys run it and get the story together. I'll come in and we'll all work it out. So there's lots of different ways that can be run. But showrunners have a lot on their plate besides the writing, in addition to the writing. And they're generally very busy with all.
I really love a lot of the behind the scenes kind of documentaries that have come out the last few years. There's one specifically about the last season of Game of Thrones, and just about how busy the showrunners were and how they were trying to manage the actors, the scripts, the zombies, the night walkers, and all this stuff, and having to do all. I mean, these guys must have not slept for like 15 years
in 4 or 5 locations all over the world.
Yeah,
I mean, thousands of extras. All kinds of computer effects. I don't know how you find the energy to do something like that. I barely have enough energy to do what I do. But God bless them, they make great television. There's a documentary that just came out about The Sopranos.
Is there?
About the showrunner of The Sopranos, how he developed the show, what the making of the show was like, the casting, all of that stuff. So there's another great behind-the-scenes documentary.
Is that on HBO?
It is.
Yeah. On the streaming?
Yeah.
Got to check it out.
It's okay.
So you mentioned, like, you kind of got your first big break, being a writer's assistant, then being a staff writer, and then you got called on to animation. What's the difference between writing like live action versus animation for you?
There's generally not a whole lot of difference. The scripts look almost exactly alike. The writing process is exactly the same. The big difference, I would say, the biggest difference between animation writing and live action writing is that there's more directing on the page. Because you're sending your script off to storyboard artists and producers who are on the animation side, you want to make sure they have as clear a picture as possible of what you're intending to have on the screen. So you're giving them a lot more detail in that regard, while still telling them, if you can come up with something better, let's talk about it. We'll definitely plus it up. But here's the vision. Here's what I'm looking for, or what we're looking for with this particular script, so that there's not a lot of confusion in the communication line.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, do they sit in the writer's room, the animators, because they have to know what's in your head? I mean, how easy a process is that to transfer what you see in here beyond what's on the written page?
Right. That's an interesting question.
I would see that being like a huge disconnect. Like if for example, if the animator is in Atlanta and you're here in LA, and you've got this idea of this room in this scene, and the character comes in and says blah blah blah, has a certain look, does something, and then exits, right? Like your version of that and the animator's version of that could be completely different. Like the script would have to be to the absolute most minute detail. Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it is. You try to get the detail across in as little amount of real estate on the page as possible. And then you say to the animators, wherever they are, whether they're in Atlanta, they're in Los Angeles, they're in Korea, they're in the Philippines, they're in Israel. If you have any questions about it, let's talk about it. Sometimes it's just not feasible to be in the same room with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
When I was working on Transformers and I was story editing that show, we didn't have a writer's room. It was all freelancers and me. We had 2 story editors. I should take that back. And they did a lot of work with the freelancers one-on-one. But we never really sat around and talked a lot of stories. We did it one-to-one, more than as a group. But after the scripts were written and the storyboard artists had done their work and the director had done their work, I would go into a conference room with them with a big stack of storyboards, and we'd just flip through it page by page to make sure everything was how we wanted it to be. And we would circle changes, and we would say, try to get this a little clearer, try to have this character come in from this angle, whatever. And if they had an issue with a line or with some part of the script, we would try to futz with that before we got into the recording session. And that was the level of collaboration with the artists on that show.
Was the Transformers one live action, or was that also animated?
No, it was animated. Yeah. It was a show called Transformers Robots in Disguise, which is a very original title. And we did a lot of episodes of that. We did, I think, 70-some episodes of that, which is a lot for animation these days. And it was a great experience.
Yeah. Did Michael Bay have a hand in that? Because he's been running that whole franchise, hasn't he?
He did not.
Okay. There's a new one coming out. They're crossing Transformers with G.I. Joe or something.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I've seen the billboards around town for this new Transformers movie. I guess Chris Hemsworth is doing a voice for it. I'm not sure which one.
Okay.
But I don't keep track of the show.
I feel like my generation has completely destroyed Hollywood because, and this might be a bit me thinking too highly of my generation, but we grew up on all the G.I. Joe, Transformers, fucking Marvel, Iron Man. Like that's my generation, and we're all in we're all in our mid 40s, early 50s, and we all grew up on this stuff, and we loved it then. Stan Lee was a legend. We all talked about it. We all collected all the comic books. I still have some of them in the plastic sleeves. Yeah, and
we'll talk.
And now no one can make a normal movie anymore.
It has really sort of changed the paradigm, hasn't it? Everything's got to have a multiverse and got to have spinoffs, and then got to attract the biggest stars and the biggest names, retell the biggest stories from the comics. Put a film spin on it. When I was 12, I would have loved all of this stuff. And movies have been really good. A lot of them have been really fun movies. I think we're a little saturated with them now.
Yeah.
And I would like to see maybe fewer superhero movies that are better, maybe, than just having a different one every.
I really liked, to that note specifically, I really liked Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight, because I feel like that took comic books into like a much darker direction, and I feel like that really spawned a new kind of generation of comic book film that people had kind of been ignoring, because everyone tried to keep it kind of camp and kind of fun, and then all of a sudden, like, Christian Bale is like, I'm a tortured man.
Right. Well, that had started happening in comics as far back as '86.
Right.
So the comics were already headed that way, and I think Christopher Nolan was able to see that and see what kind of change that made in storytelling in comics and the people it attracted to comics. Alan Moore. Also with Watchmen, Frank Miller with Daredevil, all of those guys, I think, really changed the tone of comics to something grittier. And that has been sort of the model for comics pretty much ever since. And a lot of that has moved into film.
Yeah. I mean, how comfortable do you feel like jumping genres? Like, one second you're doing maybe a comedy, the next second you're doing a drama, the animation, then it's live action. Like, I mean, surely the writing process has to change when you're kind of involved in all those different levels of theatrical releases or storytelling.
I don't know that the thought process or the mechanics of the writing change so much as your perception of what the audience is going to be. And so there's definitely a difference in writing for preschool than there is in writing for 8 to 11-year-old boys action show.
And that's Christopher Nolan's big downfall.
Right. He doesn't do enough preschool. And we've been after him for years to do that.
Come on.
Someday we'll get it.
Yeah, someday.
But that's a big difference. And you got to change your mindset, I think, when you're working those kinds of projects. I love it personally because I love the variety. I love that I'm not locked into writing one particular kind of genre. And now I have experience in a lot of different kinds of genres. Can write for different audiences and different kinds of shows. So I love it. But there are definitely writers out there who specialize in boys action shows, 6 to 11. There are people out there who specialize in preschool shows. There's a lot of different kinds of animation, different kinds of audiences for animation out there. And I think that's part of what's happening in the industry now, is that the streaming services and the other producers of those kinds of animation are trying to figure out just who the audiences are, what it is they want, and how much of it they want.
Well, you'd think that the streaming, I know Nielsen and the rating system has been around for decades, but I guess the streaming partners probably are able to lock in to a much greater degree who their audience is, who's watching what, when they're tuning out, when they're still on, what times a day they're watching. I think like they've got like all the data you could ever imagine.
Right?
Yeah.
They're collecting a lot more information about their viewers than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a better idea of it. Now they're still making their money primarily off of subscribers, and subscribers are subscribing to the whole channel, not just the preschool shows or this show or that show. But they know a lot more about their individual viewers than I think ever before. Mm-hmm. And, they're trying to cater to as many of them as they can.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of different kinds of shows out there. It's in a writer's best interest to know how to write or want to write for as many of those kinds of shows as possible.
And I mean, where do you feel like your wheelhouse is? I mean, like, have you ever written, for example, like a feature film script? I mean, obviously that would be more in depth than a television episode.
Yes.
And like, is there some part of this game that you prefer or that you like more than others?
The stuff I really like is the stuff that I watch, and I still love primetime drama. That's the stuff that I watch the most of.
What are you watching now?
Right now, we just finished Tokyo Vice. I know, right? Not a walking ad, but we just finished watching that. We watched the latest season of House of the Dragon. So I dig those kinds of shows, and that's the kind of shows that I came out here wanting to write. I love animation. I love writing animation. I love the variety of stuff I've gotten to work on. But the stuff that I still most want to write and think in terms of when I think of stories are shows that are primetime dramas.
Yeah. Did you ever catch this Murders in the Building?
Yeah. Yeah.
So well written, isn't it?
It is. It's great. It's a tremendously successful show for a ton of reasons. It's so well cast. It's so well written. And it's just a great concept for a show.
Yeah.
They're killing it. Ted Lasso was another one that was just amazing and came along at a really good time, I think, for viewing audiences. We just started watching Shrinking, which is Jason Segel and Harrison Ford, and we're enjoying that.
Can you believe they got Harrison Ford to do television?
Everybody else is. Why not?
Meryl Streep was great in Murders in the Building. Yeah.
And before that, wasn't she on Big Little Lies for a season too, I think?
She was, yeah, you're right, with Reese Witherspoon. And yeah.
We just finished Fargo, the latest season of Fargo, which was amazing, and that had a great cast too.
Ewan McGregor was in there, I think.
He was in the third season.
Okay.
This was the fifth season. So this was John Hamm and Juno Temple from Ted Lasso.
Right.
And Lamorne Harris, who was from The New Girl and is going to be in the new Saturday Night Live movie, which everybody is super excited to see. So I'm now doing ads for everybody else's shows. But yeah, Fargo is amazing too. And I think more and more feature film artists are more interested in doing television now because there's great writing there. There's great reach there. You can reach a big audience there. And there are great people to work with.
It seems like a really stable work environment too. Like, cause if you work, if you're
unstable,
stability would be a major studio green-lighting you for 8 episodes, and then you get to go into the writer's room and probably you're going to get 8 episodes and you're going to be there for a couple months, maybe a year, maybe more.
Okay, so if your definition of stable is I know what I'm doing for the next 6 months, that's pretty stable. That's pretty stable for a writer, for sure.
Right.
Right now the show I'm working on will probably run through next June or July. And that's a lot of security for somebody in the line of work. The longest I've ever held a job out here is 3 years.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the longest I've held a job in my life, actually, now that I think about it.
Because people don't understand, I think, people who don't live here, people who aren't in this world, they don't understand how much downtime there is.
Yeah.
And how hard the downtime is. Because when you're collaborating, when you're working, when you're writing, when you're building, when you're storytelling, and then it goes out into the world, then it's like, okay, what next? And that what next is like really terrifying.
Well, my last job before this, my last steady job before this was I was the story editor on a Lego cartoon, Lego City Adventures. And we did a bunch of episodes of that. It was great and we had a lot of fun. And then the phone stopped ringing. And it stayed pretty quiet for about 2 years.
2 years?
2 years.
Yeah.
And I was doing other stuff on the side. I wrote a couple of freelance episodes for a couple of shows here and there. Not nearly the volume that I had been working at before. I was picking up some work outside the industry as well. And then this call came through, and in those 2 years, you have a lot of time to think. You have a lot of time to ask yourself questions like, is now the time to try and really do something else?
I should have been a tax accountant,
right? Can I still get into dental school?
Yeah.
Things like that. But you just keep plugging away. You keep writing your own material. You keep creating, you keep interacting with other people who are creative, who are trying to get shows made. You try and stay in the game.
How does writing a freelance episode for an existing television series work? Because for example, you mentioned Fargo, it's back into 5 seasons. You rebooted from decades ago, or the original movie. Yeah. And then what, are you writing on spec, being like, oh, I know this Fargo world. Like I'm gonna write an episode for these people and then get it into the right person's hands, Or do they call you and be like, okay, some guy just really fucked up. We need you to parachute in and fix this?
I would say it's much more the latter than the former, but it's very rare that you write a spec script for television, you get it to the showrunners, and they say, great, we're going to do it. It just doesn't work. And a show like Fargo that is so continuity driven, they have a storyline they're telling all the way through. Everything is connected to the next episode, cliffhangers or whatever. They're not looking for freelancers particularly. I think in general, there are fewer freelance gigs than there used to be in primetime. But the way they find out about you is through reading a writing sample or getting a reference or having a connection to your agent or whatever. And they take a chance on you. They call you in and you talk to them. They have a story that they probably already know what they're going to do. They know what they want for this particular episode. You sit with them, maybe you sit with the writing staff too, and you come up with the details of that story. And then they send you off to write your outline. So the story is usually already there. If you're a freelancer and you get called in, they know what they want. And it's your job to give them what they're asking for in the voice of the show. And that's I think the really hard part, is to capture a voice of a show.
And obviously you're coming in new, and you might have watched the show, but it's not your show. So finding that voice and then still being able to add a little of your own personality to it can be really difficult.
Yeah. In fact, I think in most cases, they're not looking for you to add your personality. They're looking for you to meet their personality.
Right.
And write something that could be, the greatest episode of that particular show ever. They're not looking for the Adam Beechen story, which is too bad because it's fascinating.
Fantastic. We're getting it right now, live.
More than you want.
No.
So yeah, they're looking for you to come in and give them more of what they already have. Mm-hmm. And they want it to be as seamless as possible. They want you to hit all the beats they want you to hit. They want you to get your deadlines done and in, and they want it something that they can produce and shoot. So you read all the scripts. They give you all the scripts. You read all of them. You watch as many episodes as you can. You try to hear the voices in your own head, push aside the ones that you already hear, and try to write in their voice.
I mean, how much time would you get to put together an entire episode of a show that you haven't been working on previously, that you've just been called into? Like, would it be like, okay, we need a 26-minute or 24-minute episode or 42-minute episode, and you've got like a week or you got a month?
Well, if I remember right, working on MacGyver, I had, I think, 2 weeks to do the outline, and then got notes on that, rewrote it, turned it, whatever. And once that was approved, I think it was about 2 weeks to write the first draft of the script. Maybe it was 3, but it was a couple of weeks. So you've got some time, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And then how long? And then once you submit that and it's approved, like how long before they actually shoot that episode?
Generally, anywhere from a couple of weeks to a couple of months.
And would you be on set for that episode? Like, because you always think the writers are hanging around, being like, "That's not how I wrote it," or "That's not the way I intended it," or whatever.
I think staff writers may do that. I think that a lot of showrunners try and give their writers a lot of time on set so they can see how things work, grooming them for more responsible positions So a lot of writers do get to visit the set, be on set, maybe answer questions from the actors or the director or whatever. I think that's a real valuable part of the process. It doesn't really happen with freelancers because they're not going to be around that long.
Do a lot in your world? Do a lot of writers kind of move up the ladder to directing or show running? Like, do they, like, because you mentioned sometimes the showrunners like to have the writers on set so they can see what's going on, like the 360-degree view of what's happening. And I guess that's better than just sitting in a writer's room, because then you get to see how everything is implemented, and that might help the writing later, or might give you a chance to have a different job in the future where you can incorporate more of these experiences.
The more you know about a production, the better suited you are to take on more responsibility. In animation, we don't have sets, so there's no place to visit. But if you can meet with the storyboard artists, meet with the directors, get a sense of how they do their jobs, it's invaluable. Yeah. The more you know about the process, the better.
Yeah. And I feel like all these high-profile showrunners up there, they're just all the ones with all the most information about how to get shit done.
Well, they've certainly had success doing it.
Yeah.
And I think the good ones pass that information along to writers that they've hired. They're invested in those writers. They stuck their neck out, right? And then the result, hopefully, is just better television for everybody.
Yeah. It's crazy how it works, isn't it?
Yeah. It's intricate.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of levels. And even past the showrunner level, there's the executives, and they've got their own agendas, and the studios have their own agendas. And it's kind of a miracle anything gets made anyway.
Yeah. It's funny because can you imagine like your old self sitting in Arizona, August heat, 15 years old or however you were when you were going to high school out there. And then and then now you're just a few hours away in La La Land,
right?
Part of the machine that's entertaining the world.
And it's great fun. And I couldn't have imagined doing anything better. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was be in the comic book industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to do some of that, which was great fun. And mostly I just wanted to tell story. And so I feel really lucky. Now, that said, La La Land is a lot of stress. And there's a lot of stuff that you have to work through, get through, learn about. It's not, just because you move out here doesn't mean you've got it.
No, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do once you get here.
I mean, I've had the privilege of talking to some actors, some directors, some other writers as well. And from the time they come out here, it's funny, people either like hit it quite quickly right away with some luck, or it can be years before they kind of get a first crack at doing something slightly original with original thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily reflect that you're a good writer or a bad writer. It's the chances you get.
That's the terrifying part. Like, because you want to work in for someone who works hard.
Yeah.
And for someone who has some skill level
yeah.
and works hard, that puts you in a pretty good place. You want to be in a merit-based system.
You do.
But in this town, it's not always merit-based. Like, a lot of it is who you know, what you know, who your father was, blah, blah, blah. And that can play a massive role in what opportunities are handed to you.
It's also part of your job. Your job is to network. You need to meet those people. You need to get to where those people are, find a way to be visible, get your name in their ear. It's not a part of the job that a lot of writers necessarily enjoy or feel they're emotionally suited for. I'm speaking for myself.
Well, a lot of writers are introverts in a lot of ways, because they're completely consumed in their own heads, and they're creating these stories and they're putting it down on paper. And that's not someone who wants to go networking 4 nights a week in LA and going to all the premieres and all the shit.
Right. And, trying to write at the Chateau Marmont.
Using crayons at 4 a.m.
Exactly. I mean, but it all comes back to you have to make your own luck as much as you can. You got to meet the people. You got to do your own writing, and you got to find a way to make a living while you're doing it. And you can only control so much. But if you're not controlling as much as you possibly can, somebody else is out there doing it. So you got to outwork people.
How much of your writing is on spec and how much of your writing is pay to play? Like, because I was speaking with another writer a couple months ago, and he was saying, like, for every 10 scripts he writes, he might get 1 off the ground, which is crazy. Like, you think about how hard it is to write a script, how hard it is to come up with characters, put it down, format it, get it all right, review it, have it peer reviewed, and then, no, that's not good enough, write 8 more, and then we'll take the 9th.
Right. I've been lucky in my career in that I haven't had to do a lot of spec writing. I do just because I want to tell my own stories and be creative. But I haven't sold any shows or movies or anything like that. So my income has solely been from staff work and freelance work. But that said, I'm writing all the time. I'm trying to come up with new stuff all the time. Most writers are, and that's what being a writer is, man. It's coming up with ideas, and if you can't come up with ideas, finding a way around that block to get to the ideas, and always have something cooking on this.
Yeah, because when someone asks you what you're working on, you can't fucking say nothing.
Exactly, and you can't rely on the spec you had 20 years ago. So you can't say, I've got the world's greatest Seinfeld. You're gonna love it. There are outlying stories that you hear about people who write specs for older shows, but they give them such a weird twist on the plot that somebody says, oh my God, you got to read this, right? There was a legendary story about the people who wrote a Friends spec, I don't know, a couple years after it ended, where, I think it was Joey gets AIDS, right? I mean, it's nothing you would ever see on the show itself, but it certainly catches your attention if you're reading scripts.
Or Chandler's addicted to ketamine, which, Jesus, that happened to be true. Yeah.
But, and if you can make that story funny somehow and in the voice of that show, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
But you're better off writing for an existing show in that show's voice and doing something that they would actually do.
Okay, so here's a question for you. The bank account is full.
Oh, yeah. Always.
There's no one knocking at the door. There's no one on the television, and you have the chance to sit down and write.
Yeah.
What are you writing?
I'm writing graphic novels.
Okay.
I'm trying to write graphic novels. I've got a couple of them going now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like everybody else. I get 5 pages in, and then I've got another great idea to do here, or I'm completely stuck. And then I watch old episodes of SNL,
which are great,
and eat Cheetos. That's my process.
Yeah, it really is a painful experience to sit down and write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite writers. He's written a lot of comics. He created the series that became Good Omens, the TV show. And he said, I love going to write, and having written is the best feeling in the world. It's the writing that's really tough. And he's right. He's right. But it's gratifying when you write a scene or a line or a whole piece that you feel really works and expresses exactly what you set out to express.
So what kind of where are you in the graphic novel space that you kind of feel like those are stories you want to tell? Can you give me an example of something, or maybe something you're working on, or if it's not too sensitive?
No. I wrote a graphic novel that came out a bunch of years ago called Hench. And it's about supervillain henchmen and how they find their jobs, why they get into the life, why they stay, and what it does to their world. What does it mean to have a family and be a supervillain henchman? What is it like to know that you're only going to succeed on 1 out of every 6, 7, 8 jobs? There may be a payoff. You may get killed by your boss. You're almost certainly going to get beaten up. You might do a lot of jail time. Why would you continue to do that kind of work?
Mm.
And those are the kinds of stories that I like to tell. I like to take, well-established genres and try to look at them from a different sort of angle.
Mm-hmm.
I was always fascinated by the comic books where they had the thugs who were in the background with the Tommy guns and they were trying to rob the bank or whatever. And I would point to one of those guys, say, who is that guy? And how did his life come to this? And that's kind of my thought process when I'm coming up with ideas for graphic novels or anything else, is just sort of, what's something that hasn't really been explored in this that interests me? And going.
That's wild, because the Tommy guns. What was that movie? Johnny Depp was the lead, where they rob banks, and he plays the famous bank robber.
Oh yeah.
But it's funny that you would like see Johnny Depp, and then you'd be like, no, not him. 3, 4, 5. Okay, bank robber number 6. Who's that guy?
Right. He doesn't. I mean, that's not his name. He's got a name. He's somebody's kid, right? What's his family like? What? Why did he say, you know what? Forget dental school. I'm going to rob banks.
Yeah.
And I want to do it working for this guy.
Mm.
What drives a person there? So those are the kinds of things that I think about when I read comics. I think way too much, apparently. But that's the kind of stuff I like to.
Interesting. And do you envision having the chance to maybe someday tell that story on a bigger platform?
We're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying. It's been out and shopped for a long time.
Mm.
And the book came out in 2004. And since then, a lot of television and film has kind of caught up to it. I'm not saying that we blazed the trail, but I think that there are a lot of shows out there that sort of look at the darker side of superheroing,
mm-hmm.
Or look at the more personal side of it. And so I think our book is now sort of part of a group of projects, as opposed to being something that sort of is unique and stands alone, which makes it harder. But there's still interest. I'm amazed that, people still ask me if it's available. And there's somebody who's really talented right now who's shopping it around. And so we have some high hopes, but we'll see.
It's crazy that something you wrote in 2003, 2004 is still being shopped around and might have the potential to go to production, and you might get a series out of it.
Right.
And it's something you worked on 20 plus years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, it's not an idea that's tied to any particular time or place. And it apparently had a pretty good effect on some.
That's amazing though. Like, doesn't that just tell you and like any other one who wants to be a writer out there, like, just write all the time, because the more IP you create, you have no idea what'll happen in world politics or global events or whatever that'll then all of a sudden make that potentially relevant again 20 years later, 10 years later. as long as the IP is there and you put it down and it's good, it could be timeless.
And now even more than ever, IP is the name of the game. It's what do you own? Because if you're doing work for hire, somebody else is taking that property and making a movie out of it, and maybe you get a few bucks and maybe you don't. But if it's yours, then you can control it. And that's what happens. I don't know if you've ever been to the San Diego Comic-Con.
I haven't, but I heard it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
There are a zillion booths, and they all have the goal of trying to maybe get their stuff produced, television or film. There's a lot of Hollywood people that are walking around giving business cards. So Hollywood's looking for that kind of IP. And if you can produce it and get it out there so that people can see it, you got a pretty good shot.
You mean there's booths of writers at Comic-Con who are just sitting there like shopping their stuff around?
Well, they're working for publishers.
Okay.
So if you create a book independently for an independent publisher and you're there to sign autographs or whatever, then yeah, there are writers at those booths. And there are writers who get booths in what's called Artists Alley, which is just basically artists who from comics who are there to sketch for people and to sell their books and sell their original art. And writers do a limited amount of the same thing. They don't have the material to sell, but they're there meeting fans. They're talking to people. They're talking to people from Hollywood.
I mean, that's such a huge ecosystem, that whole Comic-Con world. Yeah.
Totally. I haven't been in a couple of years, but I used to go a lot, and it was always over.
Is that a decent place to go if you're in the graphic novel world? Like that's the place where you can meet the people who can get stuff greenlit?
Get stuff greenlit, meaning Hollywood style or comic book style?
Either.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the whole industry is there, right? So it's a great networking place. Everybody that I know in animation go. It's just where it's a chance for everybody to get together all in one spot. You can take meetings. You can have conversations you wouldn't expect with people you wouldn't expect, and projects come out of it. It's sort of the center of the industry for that weekend.
Yeah, and if you just want to like break open a bottle of whiskey with the Avengers, they'll be there too.
They will be there, depending on if they're mid-mission or not. They may not be on a whiskey diet, so you never know.
Oh, this Dr. Doom thing is ridiculous, isn't it?
Right?
Yeah, bringing Robert Downey Jr. back.
Why not?
I love it. He retires from Iron Man. And then he wins an Oscar, and he's like, I'll go back and get the payday.
Sure. And, he's probably having fun, too. Yeah. It's got to be fun to put on the Dr. Doom suit and be evil for, 6 months.
Yeah.
I've done it. I don't know about you.
They said I have not done the Dr. Doom suit, but it was funny. Jon Favreau was giving an interview once, and he was just saying, like, how little he actually saw Robert Downey Jr. when they were doing the Iron Man films, because most of the time he was on a green screen or he was in the suit. And his actual live action scenes were so few that it was like we made an entire Iron Man movie, and I maybe only saw Robert Downey Jr. face to face a few times because they had a second team maybe working with him on the green screen.
There are teams that are operating around the clock all over the place for movies like that. I don't know how they ever get organized. What's your favorite superhero movie?
I think my favorite superhero movie, it's not my favorite genre, but I think the Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale, Batman trilogy changed the way I see all of those kind of comic books and the way they're done. Yeah, it really hit me because I really see these comic book heroes, I think, as the comic books were in the 80s when we collected them, as dark, troubled people. And I think at some stage along the way, especially with Batman and Robin, and George Clooney killed it, and you had like Jim Carrey in there, and Arnold Schwarzenegger I think was in there, like it just became too much. And I think what Christopher Nolan did was he just trimmed it down and made it like really painful to see someone transform from losing their parents to going through this kind of like re-identification of self, where he's in Tibet and he learns how to fight and then comes back and then has to fight Ra's al Ghul in the first one, and all this kind of darkness leads to him finding a purpose.
Right.
And without that darkness, there would be no purpose.
Yeah.
And I really like that kind of storytelling because I think all of us have some darkness to us. All of us have a dark side. And especially if you're the son of a billionaire that was killed, I mean, the stuff that's going on in your head must be just unbelievable.
That's, it's interesting that you say that because you started looking at the superhero in a different way, right? Because at the end of the day, he's still a guy running around with his underwear on the outside of his pants, which is ridiculous. Right? But he made that character believable to you and made it plausible that somebody would do that. buy into that. And that's good filmmaking.
It's amazing filmmaking, and it's great script writing. And I really believe that you can only do that when a studio or a producer or whatever gives you 3 movies to make. Because in the first film, and I loved it because of this, but in the first film, Batman doesn't wear a bat suit until like the last third of the film. Like he's just a normal guy trying to figure shit out, and then he becomes Batman, in the final third, and then you've got to wait till the second movie to figure out what kind of Batman he's going to be. But at least you know what kind of Bruce Wayne he is, and he's messed up, right?
Right.
And I love that. I mean, I don't know what the deal was and whether he got a 3-picture deal up front or whether the first one had to be good. But if it was only one, can you imagine? Like if it stopped after that, all the great scenes that were in number 2 and number 3 would have been gone.
Well, the first one had to be successful.
Yeah.
And it was.
Yeah.
What was your favorite superhero comic when you were growing up? Was it Batman?
No, it was Punisher. I loved Punisher.
Yeah.
I have all the Punisher comics. I loved it. And Netflix did a Punisher series with that guy from the Walking Dead.
Yeah. And from The Bear, John Bernthal.
John Bernthal. That's the name I was thinking of. I loved Punisher when I was a kid, and I actually loved the Netflix series that they made of it a couple years ago. I thought that was great. I hope they'd bring it back someday.
Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't watched it yet, but I really want to.
Yeah,
it's a great character.
Yeah, and it was dark. Like he was troubled, and it was kind of like
it's hard to do the Punisher as a musical comedy, really, when you think about it.
Leave it up to the guys that did the Book of Mormon. I'm sure they could figure it out. Whoever the
James Gunn.
Yeah. No, have you seen Book of Mormon on Broadway?
I didn't see it on Broadway. I saw it here.
Okay.
Yeah, great fun.
I saw the original cast with Josh Gad, and back. I think I've seen it 4 times on Broadway, and it was probably the funniest thing I've ever seen. I took my mom. She laughed. She was in her she laughed the whole way through.
Yeah, it was mind blowing. It was so different for Broadway at the time. That and like Spamalot, I think, was around the same time too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What about you? Like, what was your favorite comic growing up?
The Legion of Superheroes. I was a big fan of that book, and it was a good time to be a fan of that book because they had some really great creators on it that were developing. The book takes place in the 30th century, and they were developing the world of the 30th century, and not just our world, but the United Federation of Planets, or United Planets, I think it was. And so they had characters coming from all over the galaxy to be part of this team, and you got to figure out what their planet was like, and their planet was like, and their planet was like. Then they were all interacting, and they were all teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some amazing stories that came out of that, and I was just hooked. It was a good soap opera.
Was it?
As well.
I missed that entirely. Yeah.
So that was my favorite comic book growing up. But I've had a lot of them when I was growing up. X-Men was really important to me. The Avengers was really important to me. Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
I was a Marvel guy most.
Yeah. Did you ever hear the story of Hugh Jackman when he first got the script for his first Wolverine movie? Yeah. So I hope I'm telling this right, because it'll be scandalous if I get it wrong. But his wife at the time, I think he's just recently divorced, but his wife at the time read the script, and she was quite involved in his film career and helping him kind of judge where he should go and what he should do. And he got the script for Wolverine, and he's like, I kind of like this character. Like, he's fucking badass, right? And she said, this is the worst script I've ever read. If you do this, it'll completely kill your career. And I think he's made like hundreds of millions of dollars just off that one character.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a goldmine for him. And to his credit, he has played that character really, really well. And I was fortunate enough to meet the guy who wrote Wolverine's first appearance. And he and I were on a podcast about comics for a couple years with some other friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so amazed by the reach of that character and how well it had done and the popularity of that character. And, getting to meet Hugh Jackman and all the people who made the X-Men movies. And, it's just amazing to him, and it was well earned. He had written comics for a long time. He had a lot of success, but writing, the first appearance of Wolverine is hard to top.
It's interesting, like, especially in the comic book world, like, there's a few characters that are just dark enough and just fucked up enough, pardon my language, but just fucked up enough that if you get a quality actor into that space and into that headspace, you're going to kill it. Like, so the one I'm thinking of is the Joker, right? Like, fucking 30 years ago, you get Jack to do it. He blows the doors off of it. And then Heath.
Yeah.
And now, Joaquin. And it's just like that character just keeps giving.
It's a testimony to how great the character is and how great the concept of the character is. And a lot of what they do with the Joker and have continued to do with the Joker comes out of the Alan Moore graphic novel, The Killing Joke, which I don't know if you've ever read, but it is the origin of the Joker. It gets into the psyche of the character really almost for the first time. It came out not too long after the Dark Knight graphic novels that Frank Miller did, which showed the Joker in a whole new light. And that sort of triggered a lot of other creators doing their own takes on the Joker and examining the psyche of the character. And there's a lot there. And a lot of writers and actors now have had a lot of success doing it. And it's also, I think, a testament to the power of that character that you don't think of necessarily just one actor when you think of who is the Joker. You think, Heath was awesome, but look at what Joaquin did. And then you go back to Jack, and it's Jack, right?
Yeah.
So you can see them all as being the Joker. And that's not true of all superheroes.
I wonder if they're going to cast another Wolverine someday.
I don't know. It's a good question.
Do you see the comic book space kind of being, too saturated with content these days to even think about trying to write something on spec or trying to get something off the ground in that Marvel world or in that kind of, do you feel like, okay, Marvel's got a lot of money, they're making these massive movies, but are there too many of them? Like, is that some place where you would want to spend energy trying to get something off the ground, or you just feel like there's audiences out there that have just seen too many of these characters?
Well, there's a couple answers to that. One is that Marvel and DC don't take spec submissions for their characters. They've got their characters planned out a long ways. So if you get in there, you're working with their editorial staff to sort of take the character in the direction they want to go. They're not looking for new characters, particularly unless they come from inside the organization already.
Interesting.
So if you're going to try and do that, the way to do it is to create your own property, get it out independently or through a smaller publisher, attract the attention of a DC or Marvel, and then hopefully get in if you really want to write Batman or Spider-Man, whatever. You do it that way. But honestly, you're better off creating your own stuff and owning your own IP, because when you're working for a DC or a Marvel, it's work for hire largely, and you're getting paid some royalties on it, but you don't really own the character.
Yeah, and
you're the custodian of the character for a little while.
Yeah, it is interesting, like whether you're jumping on the back of someone else's IP and helping them bring it to life, or whether you've really created your own world and your own universe on your own.
Yeah.
And then you're also trying to sell that, because you're right, all these big studios, they're constantly looking at comic books, they're constantly looking at new, novels that are out, and they're trying to figure out how to adapt them into screenplays. Like there's production companies that just do this, like you as a script reader. I mean, there's people who are script readers, and then there's people who are book readers, and they're just constantly looking for IP to acquire and try to turn into something.
100%. When I was writing comics for DC, the first book I wrote regularly for DC was based on the Justice League Unlimited cartoon, which was, pretty popular in the early 2000s, late 1990s, whatever it was.
So you wrote that for DC?
I wrote the comic for DC.
Okay.
For a couple of years. And it was one of the best comic writing experiences I'd ever had, because while it was a DC property, it wasn't tied into the DC mainstream. So I didn't have to be beholden to any storylines that were going on. I could do single issue stories, just whatever character I felt like. And because just about everybody was in the Justice League at that point, I could pluck any character and tell a story around that character and have the other heroes around that character. So there was a lot of control that I had over that.
It sounds like a ton of freedom.
It was so much fun. And then I jumped from there to writing the Robin comic book. I did that for about 1.5 years, and that was much more continuity-based. What's going on in the DC universe? How does that influence the book? And that was really fun, too. It was a different kind of challenge, because you're writing to support a storyline that's not going on necessarily in your book. So I got a really good education in my first couple of jobs in comics.
And that was out here?
Yeah. Yeah, I had been working on the Teen Titans cartoon. And I also had the graphic novel that was out. And I had a friend from college who was an editor at DC, who was also working on the animation side for them, sort of their liaison with the animation industry. And between those three things, I came to DC's editorial attention and was able to pitch a story for their Teen Titans Go comic book. And that did okay. And so they hired me to do more. And so I wrote comics for DC off and on for about 10 years.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to like convert any of the comics you wrote into an animated film or series or anything like that?
No. It's happening more now that comic book creators are being asked to bring their properties and their work to Hollywood and work on them. But I think particularly at that time, there was much more of a sense of, oh no, this person's a comic book. This person's a television. We want a film person to turn this into a film. And so those opportunities weren't there as much as they are now. And those walls are breaking down, which is because there are plenty of people who know how to write comics who would be fantastic at writing television and writing film.
Yeah. It's nice that people are not being put into boxes the way they were maybe 20 years ago.
Not as much.
Yeah.
It still happens, but not as much.
Because it's like you said, I mean, if you know how to write and you've got more than 20 plus years of experience, then maybe 30 years, like, then you know how to hit all those notes, right?
Yeah. And again, we were talking about this earlier, the process of writing an animated show and writing a primetime drama, the process isn't that different. You go in, you talk about the show, you break it down, you figure it out, you go away, you write it, you come back, you get notes, you tweak, and it's the same. It's the same. It's just the subject matter that's different.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So if Christopher Nolan came up to you, and said, "Hey,
this has happened many times."
Yeah. I'm speaking from personal experience as well. But if he came up and said, like, "Okay, we're going to make a movie about Pearl Harbor. We need you to write it together," like, sure, you could sit down and just work on it.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
It would be a learning process, certainly, because it's not like anything I've ever written before, because I haven't written a lot of historical material. And then you're working with a master.
True.
So it would be intimidating, but it would be fun as hell. And I'd learn a lot and try and do my best with it.
Yeah. But you're not afraid of any genre. No. Because writing is daunting.
It is. That blank page or the blank screen is very daunting. And you try to, procrastinate as much as you can before you have to sit down and do it. I have reorganized my bookshelves more times than anybody on earth.
My house is so clean.
Exactly.
I have a thing where like I'll get up and like walk around every like 30 minutes because I don't want to sit down too long. But I end up just cleaning the whole house, like in between this. And then of course the breaks, when you're really in the zone, the breaks are 5 minutes. But when you're struggling, the breaks end up being 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Then it's lunchtime, right? And then, Montel's on, and you got to watch that.
Maybe a nap, maybe a walk, the flats are nearby. It's quite nice, quiet.
The third hour of the Today Show, they may have somebody good on it.
Maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, anything you can find to do to not write, sometimes you do.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. So I know you're working full time at the moment with Sony. You can't talk about that. Do you have anything else kind of on the horizon that you can chat a little bit about?
The show is taking up so much of my time, and I'm so grateful for it. That I haven't really been out there kicking the tires on other stuff. I do have these other graphic novel scripts that I'm writing, and I do hope to continue working on those, whenever I can. But as far as other stuff that's in the pipeline, not really at the moment. I wrote a script for the new Hot Wheels cartoon.
Oh, those are fun. Yeah.
And the second season of that just premiered, and I have an episode of that came out. I haven't seen it yet, but it's out. So there's still stuff that's showing up on screens. But right now my focus is really on the show.
That's great. Well, I mean, I know you got to head out soon and we'll keep this kind of brief, but like if one of these things hits or the graphic novel thing gets going, like it would be amazing to have you come back because then it might be at a point where you can really get into it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
And frankly, this keeps me from having to write. So this is another great form of procrastination for me. So thank you for that.
I'm not getting anything done today. Can we just come over and do another podcast? 4 hours is fine.
Please, can I be on the podcast?
No, it's good though. It gets some juices going. It gets some endorphins going. It gets some different adrenaline going. Like it gets the mind working in a different way.
Road rage going from driving over here.
It wasn't too far, was it?
That's not too far, but
everywhere in LA is long.
I look at that as time to spend thinking about.
Yeah. Can you zone out when you're driving and just go into your own head without hitting anyone?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can like noodle on a problem in a script or something and come up with some ideas.
Yeah. More people listen to this podcast on the audio version than watch it on YouTube. And I think a lot of people listen just in the car, like driving around. I think that's like a big thing now.
Yeah. That's probably true. Which is fortunate because I think I sound better than. So
Doing great.
as far as that goes.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of podcasts in the
Yeah. No, it's very popular.
trying to keep up on my sports.
Where are you on the sports world? What's your... Really?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, I'm a diehard Phoenix Suns fan. And, that means I'm no stranger to pain.
Mike D'Antoni, Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, one of the greatest teams, small ball, ever created. And without that team, Steph Curry would not exist.
Interesting take.
Yeah.
I like that.
They are the godfathers of the way the game is played today.
They're, certainly one of them. They really trendset.
I was away last week, and I was in Montana because I need to get out of LA. It was getting hot. And I was having this exact argument with someone. They're like, "Oh my God, I love Steph Curry. He's such an original player. He's such this, he's such that." I'm like, no. He goes, if you want to talk about originality, you got to go back to Mike D'Antoni as coach, Steve Nash at point, Amari Stoudemire, and the rest of them, and what they did like 20 years ago. And without that, the modern game would not exist.
It really set the tone for a lot of stuff. The fact that they didn't win haunts me to this day.
Yeah.
There's a great book about that team. I don't know if you know about it.
No, I don't.
Called 7 Seconds or Less.
Yeah.
It is written by Jack McCallum, who's a writer for Sports Illustrated for many years. He spent a season with that team and got underneath the skin of all those players and learned all about them. It's a great, great book.
So I played Division I basketball in Canada at the University of Toronto, and Steve Nash was my absolute fucking hero because we didn't have a lot of Canadian heroes back then. Now there's a pretty good steady stream of Canadians coming into the NBA. But back then it was just Steve and Rick Fox actually who played at the Lakers, and he was Steve Nash was exactly my size. We kind of played the same kind of game, but obviously he played at an extraordinary level. 2 league MVPs, no championships, as you mentioned, but that his time at Phoenix and even before then with Dallas, where he was with Nowitzki. Those were the highlights of my life. Like watching him play like that was.
And he was a sort of a natural outgrowth of John Stockton. There were a lot of similarities in how they played and how they looked for other players. So the evolution of basketball is fascinating to me, and saying, so-and-so is the evolutionary child of this player from back in the 70s or whatever. I love that.
We got to go to a Lakers game. No?
I hate the
Lakers, no?
Sorry, guys. I hate the Lakers. I'm a Suns fan. Can't do it.
Do we have to get in the car and drive to Phoenix?
No. I'll go see them play the Clippers. I had Clippers tickets for a long time.
Yeah.
Mostly so I could see the other teams come in. But the Clippers got good while I was going to those games. That's when, whatever it was. What was it? What did they call it? Blake Griffin and Chris Paul. Lob City.
Okay.
Those were those years.
Yeah.
That was a lot. But I also wrote for the Phoenix Suns website for a number of years, just a fan column, which was a lot of fun. And the way I got into that was I lied to the team. I called them up and I said, "Hey, I'm just going to happen to be in Italy while you guys are doing your training camp over there. Do you need any help? I'm a writer. I write public relations stuff. I've written for television." And it just so happened that the person I was talking to was a fan of comic books and animation. He knew who I was. And so he said, "You're going to be there? We don't have to pay you?" I said, "No, I love the team." He said, "Yeah, come on over." So I went, I bought a ticket. I didn't have a ticket before that. Bought a ticket and I went to Italy and I hung out at training camp with Nash, Stoudemire, Marion.
Sean Marion, that was the other one I couldn't get him.
And Steve Kerr was general manager around that time. D'Antoni was the coach.
Yeah.
Bill Russell was there. All kinds of people. And it was so much fun to be on the floor with those guys. And that was a great team. They had great chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the wrong time for that team.
Yeah. If it was 2024, they'd win the championship.
I think so.
Yeah.
They just didn't have enough beef.
It's funny. Like I was chatting with this guy last week, and it was just, when I learned how to play the game, if you didn't have the 3, you'd beat your defender, take 2 dribbles, pull up at 15 feet, and mid-range. And now there's no mid-range. If you beat your guy, now he'll turn around, then you back up again 5 feet behind the 3-point line, and you jack the 3. It's like, forget the 15-footer.
There's that.
And it's insane. Like Curry at the Olympics was ridiculous.
That one game was unbelievable.
Yeah.
Mid-range is coming back, man. Mar DeRozan's made a career out of it. Devin Booker has great mid-range game. So there are guys that are out there, and that'll come back. The pendulum will swing back.
Yeah.
But right now, there's so much talent in basketball. It's just fun to watch every team. Every team has at least 1 or 2 players that, I don't know.
Do you know Casey Olynyk?
I know Kelly Olynyk.
Oh, sorry, Kelly Olynyk. That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it's worse than that. Let me go deeper. So, Coach Ken Olynyk was my university coach for 4 years at the University of Toronto, and Kelly, not Casey, sorry, Kelly. Kelly used to practice with us when he was like 12, and he could play with us at 12, 13, and we were 18, 19, 20, 21, and he could train with us because he was hanging around with his dad, and he was in the gym with us all the time.
Yeah.
Now, he would do all the drills and stuff, but when it got like into the physical like scrimmaging, he wouldn't play. But he could run with us, he could shoot with us, he could do everything. And then he ends up going to Gonzaga, and then ends up in Utah for a lot. And now he's back at the Raptors.
Boston.
Yeah, Boston. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He's had a good career.
Yeah.
And he's lasted a long time in the NBA. You go back to his college career, and he was one of the greats in the nation at that time. It just shows you the level of competition once you go up to that next level.
Yeah.
It's really fun. It's just fun to watch, and I've been a passionate fan of the Suns since I was about 7 years old.
Magic.
So yeah, not Magic.
Not the Orlando Magic.
Not Magic Johnson.
No.
I have great respect, much respect for Magic. I can't do it.
No.
We just can't. They're like the big brother that just beats on you constantly.
Yeah. I can tell you this. I did go to the mid-season tournament in Vegas.
Oh, yeah?
And I really enjoyed it.
Was it good?
Yeah, it was they took the NBA and they turned it into like a college atmosphere, like 3 games a day. You watch a game, then they clear the stadium, you go out, have a couple drinks, come back, watch the next game. And it was like they turned it into something that wasn't the NBA, but the talent and the skill level was still there.
Uh-huh.
And it was all in one place. And it was really nice.
Yeah,
they did a really good job.
I've always wanted to go to Vegas for the summer league and see the young players.
Yeah.
And that's turned into a huge scene, apparently. So I don't know if I'll get a chance to do that, but the mid-season tournament was a lot of fun. I was skeptical about it.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be a pretty cool.
Well, my brother, I was just on the phone with my brother like an hour before you came, and we were talking about going to go see Duke's home opener so we could see Cooper Flagg play his first game at Duke.
What? You have a line on tickets, I hope.
There's still tickets available.
Come on.
Yeah.
At Duke?
At Duke.
That's really hard to believe.
Yeah, still.
Wow.
Yeah, a couple $100. I mean, it's not like tens of thousands of dollars, obviously, but a couple $100 you can get in to see Cooper Flagg play his first game.
Well, just to see a game in camera would be amazing. It's on my bucket list for sure.
So when are you going to put your passion for graphic novels and comics and animation and basketball into some mix?
Believe me, I've been trying. If I thought that sports movies were where it's at and that people wanted to make a lot of sports movies, I probably would have written something a long time ago. But the prevailing wisdom has been for a long time that sports movies are really tough.
Basketball Diaries with Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Wahlberg was pretty dark.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Even Blue Chips with Shaq was pretty.
With all the underhanded money in the game. Yeah.
The dark side of the game.
Yeah. Nick Nolte killed it in that one.
Right?
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of really great basketball movies out there. Hoosiers, the one people think of. But yeah, I just love the sport. And I'm not quite tall enough, good enough, fast enough to play it myself, so I just like to watch it. Are you getting into the women's basketball at all?
I am, actually. I think Caitlin Clark is one of the most exciting players to come around, and I don't know why she's getting so much back talk from all the other players. I mean, she's changing the way people see the game, and whether she's the best player or not, it doesn't matter. She's bringing attention to the game in a way that she's bringing sponsors to the game. They have chartered flights now. And her college crew is incredible.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And she's bringing attention to a lot of other players, and a lot of the other players are bringing attention to her. So it's great. So, you've got Caitlin Clark out there. You've got Angel Reese, Asia Wilson, Kelsey Plum, all these players that you probably wouldn't know anything about if not for these last couple seasons of college ball between.
I think the WNBA is going to absolutely pop off in the next 5 to 10 years with people like Caitlin Clark coming, and then whoever the next person is, because it's going to be a better product.
Oh yeah, it already is. It's fantastic. It's so much fun to watch.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, let's go up here to the top screen. That's us.
Okay. Hey.
We're in the same room.
We are indeed.
Thank you for swinging by. Great to catch up.
Enjoyed it.
And come back anytime.
You bet. We got our basketball season coming.
Basketball season coming up,
right.
and we'll fade to black.
Okay.